All right. Well, we get started here. Welcome to the fifth annual Cannabis Sustainability Symposium. Uh, on behalf of the City of Denver's Cannabis Sustainability Work Group and the Cannabis Certification Council, I am happy to welcome you. My name is Mark Ross. I'm a consultant within the cannabis industry. And I've been on the work group now for almost 5 years, and I've seen this symposium grow from a very small symposium, one day, 1.5 days, maybe 30 speakers and maybe 15 sessions, to really making lemonade out of lemons this year, and really pivoting during COVID to having such a robust week-long symposium featuring over 130 speakers and 45 sessions with 3 or 4 different tracks. So I'm really just so grateful, given the circumstances, that we're able to host this year and really blow it up. And thank you to all of you that have joined us to spend time with us this week. This is the Insights from the Global Cannabis Market session. So that's the session. If you want to be here, this is it. I am thrilled to introduce you right now to the moderator for this session, Jessica Steinberg. She is the founder of the Global C and Entourage Network. And with that, Jessica, why don't you take it away? I'm going to turn off my camera and you guys go on.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Mark, for that really kind introduction. Just to elaborate a bit on myself, the Global C is an international cannabis consultancy, and Entourage is a women's empowerment network based in the UK. I'm currently in Greece, which is why it's a bit dark here. I live in the UK, and I'm also finishing my PhD at Oxford, where I researched the process of policymaking through the lens of cannabis legalization and commercialization. But enough about me. Let me get on to our incredible panelists with us here today. And everyone does a better job introducing themselves. So I will pass it over to you, John, as you're the first on my screen, to give a bit of a background about yourself, your current role, and kind of just a bit about your current position where you place yourself within the global market.
Thanks, Jessica. So my name is John Lea. I am the CEO of IVIC Holdings. IVIC Holdings is a multinational holding company based out of Canada. We have wholly owned operations in Colombia, where we're the fourth to obtain our license there. We're a large-scale cannabinoid producer, cultivator, processor, manufacturer located in the Medellin region. Another one of our entities is a full processing entity up in Canada, as well as an interest in an LP in Australia. Our company and where we kind of place ourselves in the value chain is our biggest asset, our most active, is currently in Colombia with Medellin. We selected that space for a variety of reasons, but one is just based on the cost and the expense to the environment of producing cannabis. A place like Colombia is perfectly suited for natural growing with its light cycle. And at a very low cost COG, we're able to produce very high quality organic oil. That's what we're busy working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited to dive into a bit more of the Colombian aspect as I went out there for field work. But before we do any of that, I'm passing it over to you, James, to give a bit of a background about yourself and current position in the market as well, please.
Hey, thanks, Jessica. I appreciate everyone being on here today. I'm the CEO of American Fiber Company. We're a multi-asset US-based cannabis company. We currently have a few business lines going. We have a vertically integrated operating medical cannabis company in Southwest Michigan called Compassion Care by Design. We also have a vertically integrated company that's coming to fruition right now in Delaware called Valor Craft Cannabis. But really, the purpose of this conversation, back in 2018, with the Farm Bill passing, we saw a huge opportunity to kind of lean into, figuring out how to successfully, safely, legally, and compliantly import high quality, CGMP, organic cannabinoid ingredients into the U.S., given the framework of the 2018 Farm Bill. We saw it as an opportunity. We also saw it as kind of what John was saying, when you start thinking about sustainability, long-term sustainability of the supply chain, It's not on massive indoor grows. It's going to be at places like the equator where, it is better for the plant. It is more efficient to do it there. And from a sustainability in this industry, which is not, hasn't been known for it up to this point, I think we do need to start leaning into, that part of, that part of the industry. So we founded Candle Industries to be an import, export, and distribution company to really open up the U.S. market for both Colombian and Jamaican imports. We've successfully imported full spectrum products from Colombia and Jamaica now. The first one we're coming in from Jamaica ever next Monday through us, and we are also the first to bring in full spectrum oil from Colombia back in April. We're really pleased to work with more than half of the suppliers in Colombia and more than half of the suppliers in Jamaica, and we're looking to bring on other countries as well as we start to open up the U.S. market for international supply.
Amazing. Congratulations on what you've done thus far. I know when Douglas gets in and he can talk a bit more about what's going on in Jamaica and what that looks like. Interesting that you mentioned the Farm Bill and some of the regulations that have allowed you to grow your business in the way that you have. And to kind of lay the framework further, I would love each of you to touch upon the regulations from an international perspective that allow you to do what you do, or they restrict what you can do. Even if it's the WHO and UN, and we know that those are non-binding, but what are you particularly looking at that's framing how you can navigate those? And if you could give some real life examples of regulations that you have found loopholes in perhaps, or if you can't find loopholes, let's go back to the conversation about GMP. What does that look like? And James, we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, so, we've really, leaned into, we really think our ability to kind of navigate the different jurisdictions and regulatory frameworks is really our competitive advantage. And we learned it both, I learned the business in the international market with the Canadian LP. That was a multinational, and I really thought about, in this industry from the commoditized standpoint. So when the 2018 Farm Bill kind of kicked off, kind of some of these changes, we've always taken a stance that we work hand in hand with regulators, and try to find the best path forward. And we continually find that if we're putting, a high integrity company out front that's doing things the right way, that works hand in hand with the regulators, it helps to work within the framework of the given law and understand that they're navigating it concurrently with us. We found that's a very successful way to navigate, and that's why Customs and Border Protection is, they look to us in the U.S. I mean, we've already brought, several, purchases of large supply from out of the country. We're able to successfully get it past the border because, when it got stuck there, they were like, who's going to get it across in a compliant way? And they called Candle, and they call us to do that. And we really want to lean into normalizing the industry as much as possible and viewing this as a commodity that's going to be in all types of things and all types of consumer goods. And we got to be building the supply chain to support that now from both a sustainability, but also a quality standpoint and a trace and trackability standpoint. So, it's a lot of gray. You got to be very comfortable navigating the gray area of these laws and knowing that you want to stay on the white side of gray, not the black side of gray. And that's kind of how we approach it. I mean, and we actually sat on a call the other, my head of compliance was on a call with the FDA, and they had a panel that you can call in and ask questions, and it was USDA and some of their regulators, and they were like, you guys are way ahead of how we're thinking about it, but you guys are thinking about it in the right way. We actually have to kind of catch up from our standpoint and how we're going to regulate this, but we're with you. We agree with how you're approaching this. So I think it's really good to kind of continue to work hand in hand and not treat the regulators as the enemy, but really as your partner in this, just like we kind of treat our auditors the same way, right? You can treat them as your enemy, or you can make them your partner. And we choose to make them our partner and help collaborate with them to open this market up for the way I think everyone wants it to open up.
Oh, yeah, and I would add, when you're looking at your sales channels here, from like a New Sierra perspective, international sales, the vast majority of that process is dominated by the regulations. Every single jurisdiction has a different set of regulations in order to move cannabinoids. Australia, Canada, the United States, you name it. They're very different regimes, but there are some similarities. A big one is, what is the definition of hemp? How do you stay out of the definition of cannabis? If you, just a simple example, if you have product that has below 0.3% THC, we all know under the Farm Bill you can move in the United States. But the reality is you still may have problems with a carrier. You simply can't find a carrier that'll touch it unless maybe it meets the EU regulation, which is 0.2% THC by dry weight basis. So the regulations really define every step of your business. What's the supply chain going to look like? Maybe you want to ship product from us, from Colombia to the United States. It may have to go, instead of doing a layover in Mexico, it may have to go to Germany first and then go to the United States. That's the sort of complexity you're looking at every step in this business. There are some things that that we know, or I think that we can look at the industry and say that's where it's heading. You mentioned the word GMP, Jessica. Yeah, it's an easy word to say, but much harder to do. But that's where we think it's going. That if you're looking to be doing import into a country, there's a few countries now that currently require GMP, but that's going to be the standard, period. You're not going to be able to move product. And then I think as that works for the import-export regime, it's also going to start applying domestically. If you're not producing, whether it's an ingredient or finished good, pursuant to a GMP process and a GMP licensed facility, my guess is you're going to be very, very supremely limited in what you can do in this space.
Right. Thank you. I mean, I heard both of you echo, it's a complex ecosystem going on. You have to navigate all of that. Compliance seems like it's key. Douglas, welcome. We're just talking about what regulations are framing the global landscape. But before I throw a question at you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your current role and position within the global market?
Sure. So I have to say up front that I heard everything from the beginning of the webinar. Some technical issues. I guess I came in as an attendee and not as a panelist, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, all that to say that this is not Jamaican time. Okay, I was here on time. My role is essentially founded Cannabis Jamaica. Cannabis is an events platform. So we have a conference that takes place here in Montego Bay. We started in 2016 and we've had it every year since, with the exception, of course, of this wonderful time that we're in. We've also expanded to do investment summits in different territories. So we've held those in Toronto, New York, London, Barbados, Cayman Islands, and Trinidad. And then we've now evolved into a series of different webinars around specific topics that we think are important to move the industry forward. So, like everyone else, we pivoted in this setting to do what we have to do. But more than anything else is, we sort of stay true to our mission of trying to facilitate the advancement of the industry, particularly in the Caribbean and LATAM areas. So, we have a good deal of network and entities that we work with throughout the region, as well as into Colombia, Mexico, and North America, of course. So that's a little bit about who we are, Jessica. One thing I will say is, in terms of the complexities of moving product in this industry, the reality is it's sort of super fragmented, right? Even when you get I've seen guys even work to get an order, from a foreign territory for export, and to get the order, and then the hurdles you got to go through just to ship the order, like as John was talking before, even the navigating the actual logistics of moving the shipment is one thing, but even all the clearances on the ground and the clearances on the receiving end. So but the fragmentation, obviously it leads to, huge inefficiencies and huge challenges. But I think therein is another reminder of what the great opportunity is in this industry. And it's just a matter of sort of repurposing some of those realities into what the solutions look like as we move forward. And I think we all have to be honest in that we don't know what the solutions are just yet, but we are working towards trying to identify it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Welcome. Glad you're here. I think the word fragmentation is something that I've definitely focused on. And you can see it locally, but we also are experiencing that internationally. And when you are looking at the global supply chain from a business perspective, what have some of your other experiences been, John and James, about where there are these fragmentations in the market or the supply chain within your social network, whatever that might look like, and how has that either impacted your business positively, perhaps because, like Douglas said, you spot an opportunity, or perhaps negatively, and it challenges growth or partnership and other business development. So if you could just name a few examples, we'll start with John this time.
Thanks. So yeah, I think fragmentation is a big problem. We think, I mean, my view is that the day of the fully integrated vertical, the large MSO in the US, it has its challenges because you really have to become an expert at each point in the value chain, I think, in order to survive going forward. And that's been our philosophy since, founding our company 4 or 5 years ago, become experts in what we do best. But it's very difficult in this space because of the issues and fragmentation. Like, where do you, for example, we had a big problem. We are producing this product in Colombia. We want to get it out and move it out to the world, but there's really nobody handling import-export. And there's all sorts of rules and regulations around it. Where do you go for that service? And it's a lot of paperwork. It's its own thing. And so luckily, with James and Candle on this line, they were there to help fill that problem. But if you look at the value chain, you're going to see that problem at every single step. Cultivation is really coming around and pretty solid. But even if you go to extraction, what exactly is the right extraction methodology to have high throughput, very high quality? Where are the big suppliers of that? I still think the jury's out on some of that technology. It's all batch, not continuous process. Distribution, who really is handling distribution efficiently? The MSOs have their own vertical integrated kind of internal distribution schemes. Who really is thinking about how cannabinoids are going to move internally, either in ingredients or finished good form? There's huge problems and issues that remain to be solved. We don't want to go having to solve all of them, but there are times when we have no choice and we have to work to doing those things. But think about the issue of supplier verification. Companies in the United States simply don't know about Colombia, for example, what the producers are doing there, whether or not they can trust them, what are their quality standards. Typically, that would be a foreign supplier verification program. Simply doesn't exist in our industry today, but it's coming. And I think when you look on the international side, the fact that we're aware of those issues and we're addressing them and tackling them, whether on our own or new companies are forming to solve it, I think it should be a wake-up call for companies in the U.S. that haven't even thought about supplier verification and what it means to their supply chain. So, and maybe James, I think maybe you know this area quite well as well. Maybe it makes sense for you to jump in. Sorry to steal that from you, Jessica, but I know James certainly has something to say here.
Thank you.
I think John, you summed it up well, but I'll just maybe talk about some of the U.S. supply chain and maybe why, we looked at some of the challenges there, and a lot of it came from our experience in the kind of medical marijuana space, and looking at kind of how the CBD market was unfolding in the U.S. and people were building these verticals. But the reality is, I'm talking to my farmers in Southwest Michigan, and all of them are throwing hemp seeds into their blueberry farms, and everyone's growing biomass. But the thing people forgot, I think, in the U.S. that I saw was, you still have to manufacture it, produce it, extract it, and turn it into a completed product of some form, and then it's got to get to market. And it became clear to me, and just kind of our research and just talking through the different suppliers and different folks, that there's all these growers out here, lowest barrier to entry, highest barrier to entry is at the extraction and CGMP processing standpoint, and there's no real downstream distribution that's set up. So you have these growers in the U.S. that were growing a lot of biomass, which is still sitting on the market, and everyone's just trying to turn it into isolate as fast as possible, selling it to, or bringing it to manufacturers to extract it, and they were giving it back to the growers to sell it. That's a broken supply chain from my standpoint. That's not how the rest of the consumer goods supply chain kind of works. So as we started looking at it, it's like, how do you kind of get past this and get to a place where there is consistent, verified, high quality supply? And that's really where like there's a fractured system, and it's fractured even more in the U.S. when you start looking at CBD production and some of those things, because each state acts like its own country with some of its own rules, and there's generally a lot of confusion around what's hemp and what's cannabis, and what's flower derived, and all those little things that regulators think are cute that really have no bearing on our ability to turn this into medicine or really high quality products. So that fractured part of the system is like our job as a Candelay is to help smooth that process through. And I think that's critical, right? I mean, that's why we did the hard work to kind of figure out all those pieces. Foreign supplier verification, there isn't one. John's right. We're doing that right now with our suppliers. We got to figure out when to get down to some of them. We'll figure that out through COVID. But I have been down to see some of the suppliers down there. We are putting that in place. But smoothing that fractured system from our standpoint is the key to sustainability and long-term growth in this industry. And it really gets into like, where do we see cannabis evolving into? My view is it's a commodity ultimately that's going to be in all types of consumer goods. Yes, there'll be completed cannabis products like a tincture oil or something like that. But the real growth in the market is in these full spectrum cosmetics. I've been talking to different cosmetic manufacturers, and there's a lot of interest there in getting really full spectrum, high quality products into some of the cosmetic lines in the US. That stuff gets really interesting. But the only way they're going to do business with any of the suppliers out of the country, or frankly, anyone in the US, can you verify the supply? Is it CGMP? Does it meet all these critical milestones that any consumer good would require for it to be, an ingredient in those products? So, I mean, that's to me, that's the business opportunity, is who can figure out how to smooth that supply chain all the way to the consumer. That's the path of least resistance for everyone. And that's, to me, that's the win. Is if we can smooth that out as much as you can in this industry, that's going to give you the best position to kind of, to grow and be successful and serve more patients and get more products to consumers.
Right. I mean, looking from the consumer end, it's really interesting because oftentimes we think of, if we talk about Colombia, for example, since it's been named and a panelist has experience there, then is that supply chain the most value add? Is that being in a certain place? And when we talk about where the most market potential might be, is the assumption that it is in the US. And so I want to explore a bit further about something that I've used to see as a triangle of a supply chain, where money would come in from North America into another region of the world. Let's say Latin America. We could extend it to places in Africa. We could extend it to places in Asia. And then those products that are then exported or imported, depending on where it is, into the quote unquote consumer market. So how do you guys think about that value chain? Kind of, I don't want to call it neocolonialism, that word has been thrown around, but we're talking about a sustainability within cannabis here at this conference. So do you see it as exploitation? Do you see it as building local economies? How do you integrate that into those local communities? If you can, be really honest and critical with the practices and experiences you've had, because I know there's a lot of skepticism from outside of the industry saying that cannabis has the potential, on the one hand, which is positive, to kind of destroy all the previous histories of exploitative markets like agriculture, tobacco, things like that. But on the other hand, it's falling into the same history, and we're reliving our past rather than actually setting a precedence for future industries. So I'm curious, from the three of you working globally, it really seems, how this triangle might play out in your mind, and what can we do, or what are we doing to move past that history?
Yeah, Jess,
let's go back to you,
can,
Doug. Or yeah, John,
if I could jump
do.
in this one, because this is something that I got some direct experience with and give some insight into the laws and regulations in Colombia. The first is our CEO, my founding partner, is Dan Tobin. His family fled Colombia when he was at the age of 7 due to the violence and political threats against his family. He's here in the U.S., became an Army sniper, toured in Iraq, law school, worked in London, a huge law firm, became an entrepreneur, and then we met up and went on this venture together. So for us in New Sierra and our company, our cultivation center is a town called San Vicente. That's the town where Dan's mother grew up, and they built the hospital in the town. We're now the largest employer in the town. While we understand the issues of exploitation of workers, the industry is not at that point. Certainly not in Colombia. Workers and keeping low turnover, because everybody's learning a new skill set here and how to grow it, do the tasks that are required for this production cycle, are incredibly important. And so turnover would destroy that. And from our standpoint, we've been very aggressive in hiring and retaining great workers. I think, but rather than just sit here and say, oh, our company's great and look at who we're hiring, there's a really more fundamental thing, and it's what Colombia has done with the law and how they're working to not fall into that kind of colonial position again. They were very smart the way they passed this law. We put a lot of comments into it, and we're very supportive of what the Colombians did with this regulation. It was really very smart. You're not permitted to export flower out of country. You can only export oil and then finished goods. The moment you turn your oil into a finished good, under Colombian law, it's considered a pharmaceutical product in a simple sense. And so there's a humongous impact to that law. What Colombia is doing, rather than exporting avocados up to the EU or the United States for the Super Bowl, they're keeping the value add in country. The extraction process, our extraction facilities, it looks just like a pharmaceutical factory, because it is. And we have hired numerous chemical engineers, plant managers, very sophisticated, well-trained, highly paid employees. This is not, we're going to just grow 50 tons of biomass, ship it out of the country, where the value add is put in. The way they've structured this law requires that you do all of this stuff in country. A lot of people may not know in the United States that Colombia is one of the largest exporters of pharmaceuticals into LATAM, including Brazil. So they already had this base, and through the law, they're looking to expand upon it and build. And that really structurally was something that drew us to Colombia. It's very important to us, obviously my partner, because his connections and their families there. But it's that value add in country that is so significant. This isn't, producing grapes or cocoa or coffee and then sending it out of country for further work. It really is a pharmaceutical industry that the company is supporting in country to build.
Thank you. And I think the regulations in Colombia, it helps to encourage the companies that are operating there, but unfortunately not every jurisdiction has similar regulations where there's a minimum percentage, for example, of locals that need to be employed for a company or to own a certain amount of the land. But let's throw it over to you, Douglas, to hear about your experience, perhaps in Jamaica and other parts of the world, and your view on the exploitation within the market and supply chain.
Well, a word that I like to use with the industry is authenticity, right? I mean, if your real objectives are properly based, then it's sort of, a lot of the policies that people argue for and a lot of the regulations that they sort of, get very emotional about sometimes, they're not as relevant because, for example, in Jamaica, ownership has to be 51% by Jamaican residents, okay? Now, that's fine on a piece of paper, and theoretically, that's wonderful, right? It sort of builds in a floor for evaluation of an enterprise, right? And it also builds in the notional idea that it's going to be controlled by for Jamaica, right? But there's so many ways to navigate around that if you're so, predisposed, that it undermines the essence of what's being, they're trying to create. And I'm saying that because I think wherever we're coming from, if capital is going into an environment in which, it's trying to extract an outcome to put back into something else to create a high value product, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going into this industry in territories that have, lower costs of wages, or the land is much more available or more, pliable in terms of producing good quality product, then it's really the essence of what's going to make this industry successful is if the players that go in are really looking and saying, how do we improve the lives of the people that work with us in this region? How do we do something that helps them in a genuine manner? Not says, they're making $250 an hour, so I'm going to pay them $275 an hour. But really, that's just because, you want to keep them around and compete for good talent. So I think a lot of this, and I'm not throwing any stones here, John. I mean, you may mention a fact about, retaining your workers, and I'm not saying that's a strategy anybody here employs, but I have seen it. I've seen enough of it where people come into Jamaica, they're excited, and there's one narrative that they put out in public, and it's a completely different narrative in terms of how they run and structure their business. And I think that if we appreciate that the cannabis industry is so nascent, we're at 0 or 0.1, and where this thing can go in terms of the future potential. And if we really look at creating something unique as far as, grasping the power and the cultural relevance and the historical, importance of this plant, and say, how do we create an industry that takes all those things into account, but yet produces high quality, world-class medicine that we can all use and be comfortable using, then I think, we start off on the right basis. And I'll just say this to the question that came before is, there's things here that are frustrating about the cannabis industry. It's new and it's coming on stream, right? So the only people who are proving out, I think, are the ones who are truly authentic about what they're trying to accomplish with the right ethics and morals. And number two is demonstrate a huge degree of persistence and resilience, right? I mean, that's what we're being tested in terms of how much do we really want this to navigate all the humps and hurdles. But I think also we have to be mindful that is a huge part of it. It's just natural economics. People are going to run to grow because, as James mentioned, it's a low barrier to entry, right? So what's that going to do? Now we have too much production, the cost goes down the toilet, right? But at the same token, that opens up more potential product segments to think about introducing CBD or cannabis into those product lines. So ultimately, it has a potential of growing the potential for the industry because more finished products can look at that as an input into what they're producing. But this is all just a function of natural economics. It's gonna balance out. The guy who stops making blueberries because he thinks his next fortune is going to be in that next crop of cannabis, he's in for a rude awakening where the price plummets and he's like, shoot, I'm going to go back to blueberries because I'm really good at that. That's just a function of natural economics. And I think we have to be mindful that we're not trying to solve problems that are not a function of this industry. Those are just natural issues that have to be resolved in the grand scheme of economics and business, versus focusing on some of the things John mentioned before, which is, if I have a buyer and he's in a legal jurisdiction to import my goods, and I have the legal right to produce them and export them, then why does it take me 3 months to move from point A to point B? Those are the things that I think we have to fix. But against the context of also understanding where this industry is today and what really we need to focus our efforts on versus we can control and should control versus it's just natural economics that's going to work itself out.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with Douglas's comments. I think they're very valid. Colombia doesn't have a 51% ownership requirement, but certainly with us, we have many Colombians on our cap table from the initial early Series A rounds. So it wasn't, we certainly we're not a case of a large company coming in, kind of planting the flag and say, oh, we're going to grow large scale. I certainly, if you look at Pharmacielo as well, their early rounds are dominated by just, quite frankly, local regional investment from in country. And there's other players as well. I think the companies, and so the authenticity comment, I think from our perspective is very true. The companies that came in, large Canadian players with lots of money trying to buy a license, plant a flag, say we're so big, almost all of those are gone. I don't think people realize how difficult these markets have been. Most of, thousands of people went to Colombia thinking that they were going to get up, get running and survive. Almost all of them are now gone and not been able to make it. So I don't think there's very few large scale players that they're coming from out of country with very little connection into Colombia that are going to have any impact in that country in the foreseeable future, in my opinion.
James, I'll throw it to you. It seems like we have regulations in this bucket: objectives, authenticity, economics. I think I would also throw in some of these buzzwords that come out they resonate with investors, and they're better at raising money. And when you throw that in and KPIs and things like that, if the company doesn't have an objective, and authenticity, one of my top values, but also a great buzzword for people to throw around sometimes, there's the reality on the one hand and then media on the other side, and this framing. And so where do you see it? What's your experience been? Let's hear about that.
Yeah, so I actually appreciate everything you guys are saying. I think I like how you put it as neocolonialism too. I think it's important we keep talking about this stuff. So I think it's one of the things and the opportunity I see in the cannabis industry as we talk of kind of equitable distribution of resources and those type of things is we're talking about it early in the industry right now. We have to keep talking about it. We have to find the right operators that are doing the business with integrity, and invest in them. And we get to shape this. And one thing that's been abundantly clear to me is we've advocated for social equity, real social equity plans in different states in the U.S. The states and the regulators, there's not a commitment from government entities to really do this stuff, because some of the requirements and the hurdles that the industry and the regulators put on this make some of the economics, frankly, very difficult. So we as leaders in this industry have to be consciously talking about this and consciously working on how do we actually make this an equitable industry, a sustainable industry for the long term, and have these conversations and bring these tough comments up. Because to me, governments and regulations and these different countries are not going to fix it for us. We have to lean in as leaders in this industry and shape how we want this to be rolled out and how this is equitable across the whole supply chain. I love what our suppliers are doing in Colombia. I'm actually really proud of what all those guys are doing, because they are, from our estimation, doing things the right way. We're working with a great supplier in Jamaica, and I actually loved the Jamaican rules. When they were telling me about kind of the ownership structure there, they're one of the exporters in Jamaica, the licensed exporters. Like they're leaning in and doing things the right way. And we're always trying to find other companies that are doing things with integrity, and that's one of our kind of litmus tests, because there is just a lot of shadiness in the industry, a lot of miscommunications, a lot of investor buzzwords, a lot of smoke and mirrors and BS, frankly. And I spent half my time trying to cut through that to get to real operators and real people that have real things behind them that are doing things with integrity. And it's a challenge, and you have to continue to work on that as a business owner and as a leader here. There's not going to be a silver bullet to equitable distribution around this industry, but we have these conversations. As importer, exporter, distributor in the U.S. market, I want to verify our suppliers that are doing things the right way. We're working with them the right way, that we're informing our buyers in the U.S. that there is sustainability down at the supply level, at the commoditized level, at the farmer level. It is being, fair wages being distributed. That's the opportunity we have to develop now as the supply chain comes online. I really do believe that governments and regulators are going to follow our lead in this instance. So it's kind of on us as industry leaders to shape the industry the way we wanted to see it go. And we have a choice to do that. I choose to work with people that are doing it that way, that are trying to do business with integrity. And I choose to not work with operators that are cutting corners and looking for loopholes and looking for ways around the regulators. That's a business decision, but that's how we choose to do business. And I think that's imperative. But I think it's on us to kind of shape how we want this to be and how we want this industry to roll out, because Douglas is right. We're not even in the first inning yet. We're just getting started.
Yeah, the self-regulation aspect will definitely feed into how the industry is regulated from a local perspective into the international one. You touched upon social equity, which actually was a question from someone in the audience, which is my little plug-in to say, if you have a question, please do ask it. I will be looking at them while we continue to speak. But back to the question about social equity, the question from the audience member was specifically about how you're paying labor and how you're working with the labor force. I know, James, you spoke briefly about that just now. I think in terms of the social equity programs and what could be implemented, what would be really useful are a few takeaways, really tangible steps or tools, things that have worked successfully for you within your business, and how other people might be able to implement that, because the more the merrier. Let's get more people around social equity. How can we do that? What has worked from a local or global perspective, we can focus on the global because that's what this topic is about. And John, let's throw that one over to you right now.
Yeah, I think, so for us on the issue of social equity, you know, it's an incredibly important topic for us in the company, really at all levels. When we went into, when I first made the trip down to Colombia with Dan, you know, 4 years ago, we stayed at his parents' house, right? And you get to know his family, you get to know the people in the town. And so just how we fund all of our companies, bringing our value, the concept of authenticity, bringing your values into the company all the way down to the lowest level worker. Us with there's so much work in getting the business up and running and getting established. When you look at us in Colombia, it's so disruptive to the industry, you know, as compared to North American production. The cost of inputs are electrical, labor, nutrients. In Colombia, our electrical costs are almost nil. Our nutrient costs, because we're organic, are relatively low. So what it allows us to do is just invest in labor. And kind of reiterating the point that I've said before, that our employees are so critical to us. This business is crazy hard. I don't think most people realize that. You cannot go through 6 months of learning and figuring something out and then having an employee get up and leave. It would destroy you. And so the business of you know, doing cannabinoid production in Colombia, and I think my guess is this is probably true for all of the producers in Colombia, where everybody's at a very nascent stage. You simply have to treat your workers well, because the turnover will be brutal. But I think if you look, you know, at some point, as the commoditization of cannabinoids increase, there may be additional pressures. But I expect, and I think this is where we love the work that James is doing, that, you know, it's not just, if you look at established industries in the US that go abroad for ingredients or supplies or parts or whatever it is, they don't just have, you know, a supplier verification. They also have social work audits, you know, sustainability, review of sustainability practices. I think, you know, with the work of Candelay, the sooner they can get to that, the better. Because for us, we think we're very far down that path. And if we have consumers, if we have everybody else in the value chain, consumers pushing back on distributors, pushing back on manufacturers, that these things matter, worker treatment matters, organic sustainability matters, then it's very easy for us to continue in that direction. And so really, we want to raise those issues sooner rather than later. The consumers who are here are the ones that have a choice. If they say these things matter, then entire industries will follow suit. And I think that's companies like Candelay that are pushing to put that infrastructure in place will start to separate out the wheat from the chaff. Those companies that kind of walk the walk or really get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, relationships are incredible for and important for every aspect of life. What I heard mostly here is a factor of social sustainability rather than agricultural sustainability, which is what the assumption might go to. I have 2 recommendations of books, anything by Tommy Spalding or Dale Carnegie to hone in. That's from a personal to a professional side. Again, I just think some of those takeaways are really important. Douglas, let's pass it over to you from a social equity perspective. I'm going to change the question a bit. What next steps need to be made? Because the fact that we're talking about it is important and the conversation is obviously moving forward, but there's a lot more to be done. So where are we going? What needs to be done?
Yeah, so I think it's, you know, it's an important distinction, right? In terms of, so I was in the States in school back when, you know, everybody talked about diversity, right? And so, you know, not to sort of get this in any crazy tangent, but that became we're supposed to do this. Like, you know, they got rid of the word quotas because it became too inflammatory. But the mindset was around quotas. You know, we need to have a woman here, we need to get a black dude there, we need a Latino because we're supposed to have one, right? And I'm not saying this by anybody on this at all, but I think a much broader conversation needs to be had. And we have this fantastic opportunity in cannabis because we have a different cultural anchor in this industry. We absolutely do. The people who are genuinely in this, trying to make it become something that's important globally, I think they have a fundamentally different anchor in terms of what's driving them to do this. But I think it's a time when we need to be bold. You know, there's nothing wrong with, from a corporate perspective, having the right values. That's super important, right? But I think social equity now needs to be sort of looked as a strategic imperative, right? With our industry, we can lead. You know, we can have companies come together, and instead of us filling at the edges and making our sort of, you know, our team better represented with all the different minority considerations, et cetera, or local inputs represented. You know, we need to think a little bit bigger than that. Like, take Jamaica, for example, right? You have a lot of small farmers here who've been doing this for a long time. They're passionately attached to the industry. And so now that it's legal, they want to have a license. They want to have their own business, right? And now on the face of it, we can say, yes, they should. But have we actually sat down and asked some of these folks, are you really committed to negotiating a lease, to hiring people, to holding them accountable, you know, all the different facets that go along with owning a business? And the truth is, a lot of them will say, oh, no, I just want to grow cannabis. Okay. So, you know, we have to look at, from my perspective, social equity means everyone should have an opportunity in a broader way to participate, right? I'm not saying you put capitalism to the side, but it's a different form of looking at it to say, as an industry, can we look at ways in which we can provide that sort of education? We can say to them, come learn about having a cannabis business. You know, James can say in Colombia, like, this is what it is. This is how our vertical operation is set up. These are different aspects of it. So people have a welcomed environment within which they can learn and then choose what they're going to do. You know, that to me is what we have this opportunity now to do, and not necessarily look for, you know, I can hire these 3 people, and because this one fits this category and this one fits that category, I'm going to get one of each. You know, good for me, I did my thing. That's wonderful, but how much does that really change their lives? How much does that take that person who was here before? Now there's an industry that comes to them, and if we give them that education, we give them that opportunity, we give them that knowledge, we let them see a better way of looking to the future. You know, we now impact so many more people around their own personal ecosystem that we're really finding a way for this industry to help people grow, not to help people survive, and not to help people become, you know, nice value-added cogs in our machinery, but really give them the tools to thrive. And I think if we can embrace the fact that a more vibrant social equity mindset is going to redound to the collective benefit of moving this industry forward, and as a subset of that, make our own businesses better. I think if we can get around that concept, then we can start to embrace this in a much more holistic manner. But the word I like to think now is bold. We have to be bold. Our solutions need to be bold, because, you know, what I'm used to doing in terms of mentoring somebody who's on my team, you know, that to me might have been like, I'm doing a good job, like I'm being a good guy. You know, I'm hiring a guy who started this role and trading him up, and we move along. But
I think that we're getting some Wi-Fi connection issues. James, in the meantime, if you have anything else to add about social equity, oh, Douglas is back, but I'm going to pass it back to you still. If you have anything to add about social equity, please add on to that.
Yeah, maybe, James, I don't know, maybe let me just say something really quick to hit on what Douglas said. Look, Colombia has a small grower program too. 10% of your supply has to come from small growers, and we like it a lot. It really helps our business, and it allows us to grow in certain ways and develop strong partnerships. But I don't think you can go too far with that, because the cannabis industry is changing and changing rapidly. And there's a commoditization coming on biomass, on isolates, every point in the chain. And so this isn't, you know, the view that it's some cash crop and you're going to make so much money in it because you plant a field of cannabis. It's everything else that matters. It's your quality designations, import, export, sales, distribution, everything that you would expect. So I don't think those are a panacea. I think they're nice and can be very helpful to support a local, agronomy economy. But ultimately, I do like what Colombia is doing as the model. It's forcing the value add to remain in country. It's forcing you to develop a much more sophisticated industry in country, helping them develop their pharmaceutical supply chain. That to me is the sort of thing where there are bigger potential margins. The problem though is getting broader participation. And I will say, I think you have to be careful in just coming to assumptions, thinking that North American companies kind of went and just invaded Colombia. I don't think that's the case. There's not a lot of large, sophisticated players that are left standing in Colombia, but the ones that have tremendous investor support from founder support from the very earliest rounds, and Colombians directly investing in the industry. That's where I think the industry found it. And the large North American players, Canopy and others that went to go into market, they went and bought farms. Canopy is an example, not to name names, but they ended up pulling out. So they dumped hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars into that market and then pulled out of it. So either you're connected to it, you're building real value, you're treating people the way they should be treated, you're treating the environment the right way, or I just don't think you can survive in this industry. It'll create too many other hurdles.
So before I throw it back to you, James, I want to note that we have 5 minutes left, and to follow up on what you've said, John, I think Colombia is an interesting one because it is a massive, massive country, and there's a microcosm within the climates and everything that's going around. It really has to be localized. So even the types of seeds and the temperature that you're looking at, it's so variant across the entire country. So it's difficult to make, like you said, like broad generalizations and assumptions. But we have, like I said, a few minutes left. So if each one of you could spend only 1 minute, please, just 1 minute, on the following question. If you can please rate from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where we are at from a global perspective on the sustainability of the market. And is that falling short? If it is falling short, where is it falling short? If it's excelling, how is it excelling? And let's just wrap this up. Whichever note you want to leave off on, James, kick it off.
Sure, I'll give it a 5 right now, and a lot of it has to do with back to that regulatory fragmentation, which has caused huge inefficiencies in the supply chain, which makes sustainability significantly more difficult. And let me just throw in, because social equity, we push on this all the time. I push on it personally. I'm like a NGO guy. I got my master's in social in nonprofit work. Like, this is equity is critical, but the challenge here with this industry is there's 5 things that I push in every state that we try and get social equity the right way done, but we got barriers to overcome. Capital markets are brutal. Like, there's not access to the same capital as everyone. There's not access to the operational expertise. The operational expertise to do this business is incredibly high. So to have the people there on your team to do it with the capital, that's a challenge. And the industry is not set up to encourage small business and small farmers like that to actually participate in a fair way. Regulatory and jurisdiction, regulatory compliance and legal compliance, heavy barriers to entry. The biggest thing that is also missing in this industry that's not addressed directly, and I think in a meaningful way, and I'm glad Jamaica does it, but there's lots of ways around it, but is ownership. Ownership in real estate are the other key barriers to entry that governments, banks, other institutions can start leaning into, providing capital and equitable access to those things so that everyone can participate in a fair way in the industry. But the challenge is the regulators in the countries and the states kind of have to be on board with the operators, and we have to objectively acknowledge that these are barriers to entry and actively solve them. Until we solve them, we're going to keep having these conversations, in my opinion.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So we have a 5. Let's go to Douglas. You have 1 minute, please.
I would give it, I think 5's a fair grade. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I think there's a long way to go. And quite frankly, I think some of the sentiments that James just echoed, I would definitely, James just mentioned, I would definitely echo, because I think they're spot on. I won't go beyond that. I think Jamaica, we talked about the way to circumvent how that equity is really divvied up and what's the real equity versus the paper equity. And it's okay. It's okay if we can get to investing in has a mindset of, I want to be fair. I need to earn a proper return on my money. That should never be in question. But I want to be fair. I want my partners to also grow and blossom, and I want all the stakeholders attached to my enterprise to also grow and blossom. I want the villages within which I work that I can make a significant impact and help those folks. I think that's the opportunity cannabis has and can and should embrace as we look for different ways to do business right. That's it.
Cool. Thank you so much. We have 2 5s. Are we going to end with another 5? John, let us know.
I was at a 4. I'm a little bit more skeptical. I think, obviously the market I know best is Colombia with respect to global operations. I think that, the concerns that I have are that the issues that James raised, capital, operational expertise, this isn't an easy business, and those things are really on high demand and needed if you're going to survive in the global space. And so the fact is that I think there's already been just kind of a shuffling and a paring down of the number of companies that think they can operate globally. And the concern is that while whatever view of what the industry's done in places like Colombia up until today, if you value social equity, that the concern is that there'll be mergers, consolidations, and really only a few players worldwide that are meeting the need for a worldwide need for cannabinoids. And as that happens, these concerns will raise dramatically. And I think diligence and vigilance by consumers and those that are operating in different parts of the value chain that interact on the global side are going to have to make sure that they demand that sustainable practices, organic practices, fair labor standards, social work audits, you name it, are really continue to be enforced and applied in the industry.
Cool. Thank you so much. Ending on a positive-ish note, but I think the takeaway from all of this is that people know social equity is important, compliance, work with the regulators, local, global, fragmentation, lots of keywords in there, so people hopefully can watch it back. But thank you to the 3 of you for your time, your energy, experience, and expertise. And yeah, I'm sure people can connect with you on LinkedIn if they have follow-up questions. But thank you again. Really appreciate it. And I think we'll pass it over.
Thanks for moderating, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Douglas. So thanks, James. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone.
Great job, Jessica. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, James, John, Douglas, Jessica. This was a great discussion. We need to move on. There are 2 more hours of programming still today and a full day tomorrow. So we hope you'll join us either later today or tomorrow on some of this great material. Thanks again, everyone.